Joshua 5, verse 1. As soon as all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, that's the Mediterranean Sea. So now in context here, Israel, the nation, is on the eastern side of the Jordan River. God, last week or 2 weeks ago, stopped the Jordan River, much like he did with the Red Sea, part of the Red Sea, famous story of Moses going through the Red Sea with the nation of Israel. God has done it again, but this time with Joshua, Moses' assistant, because Moses is dead, so Joshua now is the leader. He takes them through in a very similar miracle 2 weeks ago in the story. He brought them into the land. So now the people who were already in that land, they were to the west of the Jordan River, are now in fear, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, modern-day Israel. When all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel until they had crossed over, their hearts melted, and there was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel a second time." It gets worse. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath Ha'aroth. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the males of the people who had come out of Egypt, all the men of war, had died in the wilderness on the way after they had come out of Egypt. Though all the people who came out had been circumcised, yet all the people who were born on the way in the wilderness after they had come out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the people of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nation, the men of war who had come out of Egypt, perished because they did not obey the voice of the Lord. The Lord swore to them that he would not let them see the land that the Lord had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So it was their children whom he raised up in their place that Joshua circumcised. For they were uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. There's a lot of circumcision in chapter 5. When the circumcising of the whole nation was finished, they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed. No kidding. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." And the place of that place is called Gilgal to this day. Gilgal in Hebrew means to roll away or rolled away. When the people of Israel were encamped at Gilgal, they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month in the evening on the plains of Jericho. And the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. And the manna, which it was bread from heaven that God fed the people of Israel with while they wandered around the desert. And the manna ceased on that day after they ate of the produce of the land. And there was no longer manna for the people of Israel, but they ate of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and he looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with a sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" Probably pointing at Jericho. And the man said, "No." Doesn't sound like the right kind of answer for that question. "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth, and he worshiped, and he said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Wow. If you've been following along with our story, the nation of Israel has finally made it into the land. 2 weeks ago, in the story, they made it onto the dirt of Canaan, modern-day Israel. And now, as they're getting ready to take the land, God has some specific instructions for them that he wants them to follow because there's some issues from the past that they haven't dealt with that in order to move forward, They need to deal with the past. So let's look at it this morning. Number one, reinforcing God's requirements. Reinforcing God's requirements. Once Israel crossed the Jordan River, they were now home in Canaan. Through spies, and probably traders as well, the reputation of Israel's God went ahead of them. So the kings of Canaan lived in fear. Listen, no one dwells in safety when they dwell apart from God. Let me help you this morning. I'm going to help you. There will never be a day that you can live apart from God and be blessed. Ready? It's possible for you to, now you can't physically live apart from God because you can't escape God. God is everywhere. Go to the bottom of the ocean in a submarine, God's there. Ride a rocket to Pluto, it got demoted from being a planet, but you could arrive at Pluto, say, somehow, God is there. In other words, you can never escape God. There'll never be a day where you can escape God in a physical sense. But understand this, a lot of us live our lives apart from God spiritually. And here's how that works out. God tells you to do something or not do something in your heart, in your spirit, through God's word, whatever. And we go, nah, I don't think that's not important to me right now. Or it's going to be a difficult conversation. You're like, nah, I just don't want to do that. So watch. Over time now, God wants to bless you, but you fight against the blessing of God because you're disobedient. So God says to you, go handle that situation. You know that fight you got with your dad 20 years ago, and you need to ask for forgiveness because you were a total idiot? But you've let this thing go on and on and on, rather than saying, I need to have this hard conversation, or I need to text him and go, hey, Dad, can we talk for a second? Or Mom, that thing we had? Or your business partner that owes you $150,000, and you've been fighting him legally, and it's been 25 years, and you're just angry and bitter, and it's consuming your life because you need that $150,000 to move on. And God's basically telling you, who cares about the $150,000? It's destroying your life, it's consuming you, who cares? God can make more money. God's not poor. But it's you that needs to deal with it, because it's not about the money, it's a heart issue. So the point being is that there's a bunch of stuff in our past that if we don't have some conversations about that, we can't move forward. And God's saying, before you move forward, I want you to go handle that. And in the present, we go, I don't know, it's not that important to me, or it's going to be a hard conversation, so I don't really want to do that. Listen, you can never live apart from God physically. You can't escape him. But you can live apart from him spiritually. And the way you do that is to refuse when he's put something in your heart or in your mind to go do, and you go, I'm not going to do that. No one dwells in safety when they dwell apart from God. Listen, no one dwells in safety when you spiritually live apart from God. Let me help you with this. If you're alive today, it's a direct result of God's mercy. Here's my point to you. You didn't fabricate your great life. So some of us go, I'm an atheist. I don't even believe there's a God. Okay. The fact that you don't believe in God doesn't negate the fact that God exists and still loves you. Your belief or non-belief has absolutely zero to do with reality. Because what's true is true. Sometimes we don't want to align with truth because it actually is going to get in the way of our lives. So we know what's probably real, but because that's going to affect our life, we choose against that and live a different way. And the kings of Canaan in our story today, they had their own gods. They had the Asherahs, they had Baal, they had all these gods in Canaan. And guess what? They all thought their gods were real or true. And here's what happened. The true God of Israel decides, I'm going to stop the water and I'm going to bring the people into the land. All of a sudden, truth meets facade. And instead of those kings going, wow, we need to get with the Israel's God because he's real, he can do miracles in the real world. Instead of doing that, you know what they did? They became fearful. You want to know why? Because all of a sudden they realized what they believed wasn't true. And instead of being submissive to the true God, they said, we're going to keep on believing in our own gods and live in fear. Listen, you can live apart from God spiritually. You can live apart from God in the ways that you know is right, but you choose against it. And you know who that damages? It damages you. God will love you every single day of your life, even when you're in rebellion against him, even if you go, I don't even believe that there's a God. You live in atheism or agnosticism and you just go, I don't even know, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't even matter. God still loves you every day. But here's where the key comes in. Don't think you can rebel against God and be blessed by God. Will God ever stop loving you? Nope. Will God always bless you? No, he will not. Why will God not bless you? Not because he doesn't love you. He will not bless you if you're disobedient. You know where God's blessing stops? Is where your obedience stops. And here's how that plays out in your life. You won't have peace in your heart. You'll have zero peace in your heart until you're obedient. Until you start having those hard conversations, until you start letting go of bitterness and anger from the past so that you can move forward. Your heart and life will never have repair unless you're going to deal with some background stuff. And in our story today, we're going to find out the cost that it was to deal with stuff later rather than earlier. Look at this. The first step of Israel's new journey was to clean up past leadership failure by circumcising the males. As the male was responsible to build up and lead his home in godliness, circumcising his sexual organ was a physical representation of his spiritual covenant with God. So if you don't know what circumcision is, ask mom on the way home in the van. But for right now, I want you to turn to Genesis 17. Turn to the first book of your Bible. It's the book of Genesis. Now turn to chapter 17. Genesis 17. We're going to look at verse 9. I'm going to show you, listen to me. I'm going to show you what happens when you go, you know what, it's not important for me to follow God right now. I'm going to show you what happens in your life through a story from Israel's life. Genesis 17, verse 9. So, listen, in the West, we circumcise our males. If you grew up in Europe, chances are you were circumcised. You grew up in the United States, almost 100% guaranteed you were circumcised. And many of us that have had sons or were male ourselves have been circumcised, and there wasn't even a reason that we did it. From a spiritual standpoint. They just did it at the hospital. They asked, Mom, you want your son circumcised? And we kind of go, yeah, I guess. Understand this. Circumcision in a lot of other parts of the world isn't done. You travel to other countries, it's not done. And the reason is this. Because Europe and the United States have a Judeo-Christian heritage, we have circumcised our males because it comes out of Genesis 17, where God is going to make a promise to Abraham. Okay, so Genesis 17:9. And God said to Abraham, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you. So now watch, Abraham's the first Jew. He's the first Israelite. Okay? God calls him, and all the offspring from Abraham, all the males are to be circumcised for all time, as a sign of the covenant between the men who are supposed to lead and love their homes and God. It's a physical representation at the most intimate level of a covenant with God. This verse 10, this is my covenant you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised. That's about exactly what we do in the United States and in Europe and in many other parts of the world that have a Christian background. He who is 8 years old among you shall be circumcised, every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from any foreigner who is not of your offspring. Both he who is born in your house and he who is bought with money shall surely be circumcised. I like that one better. So shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Let me make this point to you. Ready? If you're like, why are we talking so much about circumcision? Because this is the point in the story. For 40 years, listen, a little over 1 million people were slaves as Israelites in Egypt. When Moses came and got them, they're a little over 1 million people. They're all circumcised at the beginning, including Joshua. So now they come out, watch. They go to the border of Canaan, originally the first time. They go, it's too scary, we don't want to go in here. God goes, okay, you don't have faith in me? I'm going to march you around for 40 years till all the old guys are dead. But watch, during the 40 years, they're supposed to be circumcising their sons. And for 40 years they didn't circumcise anybody. And this is the covenant between men and God. It's interesting to note, females in Israel are never circumcised because there's no real way to do that. At least not in a real non-abusive way. So understand, females were never supposed to be that way, only males. Why males? Because men are the head of their homes. You are the leader of your home, men. There's a covenant that you make with God as the head of your home. You're not the dictator of your home, but you're the loving leader of your home. Your wife is in your home for many reasons, but one of them is for protection and love and safety. And there's many things that men provide that God has called you to. She took your last name. You guys, your kids probably have some of your weird facial features. Hopefully they look more like your wife, but sometimes, kids get stuck with your looks. The point is, you pass your genes along, you pass who you are along into your kids. So men have a dual role. They literally, physically, through intercourse, build up their home. You have kids. You impregnate your wife. And now, secondarily, not just to build up your home physically, but you are actually to lead your home in godliness. So God uses the physical connection of circumcision, where you're literally circumcising the most intimate part of who you are, how you literally pass along your genes, to say, I covenant before God that as a man and head of my home, I'm going to love my home and I'm going to lead my home. That's what that means. Originally, it's what circumcision meant. We just do it, we don't even know why we do it in our culture, but man, originally that's exactly why it was done. Now for 40 years, listen, about 600,000 boys to men haven't been circumcised. For 40 years, nobody's been circumcised. So watch. The Israelites might be going, you know what, that was old. I know he wants us to do that, but that's going to be painful, and let's just forget that. There's stuff from our past, let's just forget that. It's not a big deal to us. But guess what? It is to God. And here's the principle. Human disobedience doesn't delete divine directions. Woo! It's going to get rougher, so hang on. If you're uncomfortable right now, it's going to get more uncomfortable. Especially if you're a guy. I'm not going to show pictures, because I like to show pictures, but I want to make this point to you. Listen, human disobedience, listen to me, human disobedience doesn't delete divine directions. God's asking you to do stuff. He's asking you to clean up some past stuff. And we go, it's not that important, or I'm not really interested in doing that, or that's going to be uncomfortable, or blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't delete the fact that God has a requirement on you to go do those things. Now for the rest of your life, though, watch. The blessing of God's going to be hindered in your life because you're disobedient. Think about it as a parent. So for those of us that have kids, when our kids do what we want them to do, man, it's pretty much, the door's wide open for blessing. If you got the money, you'll bless your kids. If they're obedient and they just do, Mom, I'd love to take out the trash. How can I help? Your kids have never said that, but I'm just saying in a fantasy world, in the world of fantasy and theory, let's just say they did that one time. Now, the parents laughing here because this is exactly the point. It's exactly the point. It's like, I don't even know if my kids ever said that in my whole entire life. That's the whole point. But if your kids were like that, you'd be like, dude, sweetie, what do you need? Obedience opens the heart of a parent, but disobedience makes you not want to bless anybody. Why should you bless somebody that spits in your face? Now, do you ever stop loving your kids? No. Even in disobedience, you still love your kids. But if you bless your kids when they're disobedient, that's called dysfunctional parenting. Let me help you. As your pastor, that's free advice for your parenting. When you bless disobedience, you're actually hurting your kids. You're destroying them because you're blessing them when they're not being obedient. And so now they learn, I don't even have to do anything to get the stuff I want. But that's not the real world, and it's not how God relates to us. It's the same thing with God now to us as adults. The same way we would teach our kids, why do we expect God to bless us when we want to be obedient? Or when we want to be disobedient? God says, go handle that thing, and you go, I'm not really interested. It has nothing to do with your interest. It has to do with the fact God asked you to do that. So why would God bless you when you go, screw you, I'm not going to do that? God goes, okay, I'm not going to stop loving you, but that doesn't mean I'm going to bless you. You want peace in your heart? Go handle that situation. You want me to bless you financially? Go handle that situation. You want me to open up the windows of heaven to you? Go handle that situation. And we go, I'm good. That's exactly what Israel did for 40 years. But look what happened here. God didn't go, okay, you don't want to do it? Let's just call it good. Oh, I forgot. Nope. Look what happens. This act of circumcision, which should have been done at birth over the last 40 years, now has to be done on grown men. Many in their 30s, 40s, and 50s with no painkillers using sharp rocks. Woo! Hey, ready? I'm going to set the scene because I'm a scene setter. Ready? Joshua chapter, you want the Bible? You want to be taught the Bible? Here we go. You know what happens in Joshua chapter 5? About 600,000 men, boys and men, have never been circumcised for 40 years in the desert. But God says through Abraham, I want you to circumcise every male because they're the leader and progenitor of their home, and I want them to know, even at their sexual level, that they belong to God. Okay, but they don't do it. Now they get into the land and goes, to be victorious in this land, you better clean up your past mess. And you know what happens? All the men get together and they go to a hill. And let me show you what a flint rock is so you get an idea. This is a flint rock. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So what they do is this is the surgeon's scalpel 3,000 years ago. So flint rocks are razor sharp rocks, but they're still rocks. So imagine being circumcised as a 30, 40, 50-year-old with a flint rock with no anesthesia and no anesthetic. It's basically drop trowel, here we go. Where's the Jack Daniels? Hasn't been made yet. You mean like, I got nothing? You got nothing. Step on up and here we go. And imagine now, watch. Oh, it gets worse. You think that's bad? About 600,000 males get circumcised during the same day. So many guys get circumcised. Look at this. So many males were circumcised, they called the place Gibeath Ha'alaroth, which means hill of foreskins. So if you're reading chapter 5, listen, if you're reading chapter 5 in Hebrew, you get to where it describes it Gibeath Ha'alaroth, and that literally means in Hebrew, the hill of foreskins. So imagine on the plain of Jericho, imagine the people at Jericho looking over the wall going, dude, what is going on over there? So many men had to get circumcised, they could literally make a hill out of it. They actually labeled the place a Hebrew name. And here's a point I want to make to you about that. Here's the reason I bring it. I want to take you to the scene for this reason. And this is what I tell my staff. When they're dealing with interpersonal issues or they got difficult people in the church, you know what I tell them? I give them this phrase, and I hope you employ it in your own life. Bad news doesn't get better with time. Bad news doesn't get better with time. So don't think, I'll just deal with that later. You know what they should have done? They should have circumcised their males at 8 years old rather than 50. Because it's always more painful to obey God later than it is on the front end. Obey God when God calls you. Don't wait till later. Because it's always more painful to follow God later than it is at the beginning. Many of us, God asked us to change our financial situation, and we go, no, I'm just going to keep gambling because I know I can make that money back. God asked us to stop a habit in our lives. We're burning money like a hole in our pocket because we smoke too much. Or now we can smoke weed, and we're like, oh, it's legal. Or we drink too much, or whatever. And God goes, stop that. Listen, it's always harder to stop later than it is on the front end. It's always more painful to stop later than it is to fix it now. It's better to do it at 8 days old than at 58 years old. And my encouragement to you as your pastor is God never stops loving you, but he will stop blessing you if you don't deal with some of the past so that you can move forward. Number one, reinforcing God's requirements. Just because you don't want to do it doesn't mean the requirements go away. It just means it may hurt more later. And number two, rejoicing in God's faithfulness. Rejoicing in God's faithfulness. 40 years to the day after Israel left Egypt, they walked into Canaan. Man, I love this. In Exodus 12, 1 through 3, it says that they left Egypt as slaves through Moses on the 10th day of the first month of the year, of their calendar year. It says that they wandered around for 40 years, and literally to the day, 40 years later when they left, they walked into Canaan. And I want to make this point to you. God is always faithful. God is always faithful. You might not be faithful. We're not faithful people. We lie, cheat, manipulate because we want our way, because we want to play God. So because we can't play God, we'll try to manipulate people with lies and fabrications and behind the desk dealings or in the dark dealings. But God is never faithless. God is never unfaithful. You follow God, here, let me make a guarantee to you as your pastor through God's word. I'm going to guarantee you this. You follow God, he will bless you. It might not always be in the way you want. I'm not saying you ask and God will just dump something on your lap. It might not always be what you want, but let me tell you something. You will always feel peace in your heart. You'll always have joy in your life, and God may bless you even beyond that, financially, relationally, whatever. God wants to bless you. He will always be faithful to you. Even if you're unfaithful to him, he's still faithful to you. But here's where the rub comes in. If you don't want to be obedient, God is under no obligation to bless you. And now we see after 40 years, Israel's finally obedient, and God blesses them by actually physically bringing them into the new land. While they should have died after only days in the desert, God had provided water, food, and clothing for their journey. I love Nehemiah 9, 20 and 21. It says this, "You gave your good spirit to instruct them and did not withhold your manna, which was bread from heaven." That's how they ate in the desert for 40 years miraculously. God gave them bread from heaven every day. "You did not withhold manna from their mouth and gave them water for their thirst. 40 years you sustained them in the wilderness, and they lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet didn't swell." It's the amazing faithfulness of God. Even in their disobedience, God still loved them and took care of them. Now finally, after the old generation died, the younger men now lead the nation in as faithful leaders, and God now is going to bless them. So they got to clean up old stuff. They got to get circumcised. They got to get back into their covenant relationship with God. To move forward, they got to go back. But once they've done that, man, it says they ate of the grain of the land. And I want you to understand this. You will never sense the blessing of God until you start becoming obedient. You want to eat the grain of the good of your life? You want to stop living in your double life? Man, living a double life is exhausting. Living your online life and trying to run your real life and all that stuff, man, it's exhausting to live a lie. It literally tears your soul apart. Because you're trying to be one thing. You're trying to be your avatar online, but you got to live with your own real life. But guess what, man? You live with integrity, so you don't have to support lies and keep on setting up this weird false structure. Dude, it's amazing how much energy you can spend on living for God when you don't have to start supporting all your lies. And I love that about Israel. They finally got rid. It's why it says Gilgal. I rolled away the reproach. Once you got circumcised and you cleaned yourself up and you repented and came back to God and stopped living this disobedient, rebellious lie that you've been living, man, I rolled away the trash out of your life, and now you're free to follow me. It's the most freeing thing in the world when you can just stop being fake and be real with God and others. All of a sudden you're clean, you feel peace in your heart, you feel joy. You have energy now to follow God rather than trying to support your system. Now, for the first time in 39 years, they celebrated the Passover. The manna from heaven ceased on this day because they now ate from the land. God's promises never fail. Let me encourage you to follow God this morning, friends. I want to encourage you for this reason. God doesn't need stuff from you. He's not poor. He doesn't need your money. He doesn't need your energy. He doesn't need your talents. He doesn't need stuff. God's not needy. You know what God wants? He wants your heart. Because in your heart is where rebellion lies. God's strong enough to do everything. He doesn't need wealth. But God wants wealth from you to give because you need to know where your heart's at. God wants your talents because you shouldn't use your talents just on yourself. You should serve others. The blessings God has given you isn't just to bless you. I hope it does bless you, but it's not just for you, it's for others too. Because if it just ends with you, then you're just self-oriented. So what God does is he goes, I've given you great talents. I've given you great finances. I've given you great relationships. Those aren't just for you. Use them for me as well. That's how you keep from becoming self-focused. When you're others-focused, you're really truly God-focused. And now Israel, for the first time in 40 years, is experiencing the goodness of God. Why? Because they're focused on God. They've cleaned up relational problems and issues, covenant problems they had with God in this case. And now they're ready to move forward. And now God stopped the manna because for the first time in 40 years, they actually eat of the grain of the land. Here's a satellite shot of Jericho. And like I said, when we go to Israel, we will visit Jericho. If you're just joining us, they were on the east of the Jordan River, which is right in the middle of the picture. They were kind of camped out in that plain area there. About almost 2 million people camped out there. God plugs up the Jordan River supernaturally. It dries all the way up for about 15 miles. They all walk over in one huge horde into the plain of Jericho. And this is where they're at. This is where the circumcision happens. And this is where they're sitting just to the east of Jericho there in the plain. Now, for the first time in 40 years, they're eating of the goods of Canaan. Why? Because for the first time in 40 years, they've actually been obedient. It's not God that fails you. It's us failing to be obedient when God says, are you done? Are we done? Are you going to keep going on more days? Okay, well, I'll wait because I don't die. Unlike you, I don't die. So you want to keep burning some more days and weeks and months into your lie? Okay. Just like your kids. You want to be stubborn and disobedient? Okay, but you're not getting any of my money. You're not getting the car. You're not going to live in my house. There's always consequences for disobedience. That's functional parenting. And imagine if God is perfect and we're imperfect, God still loves us, but man, he requires things of us. Once you go handle those things, it's amazing the burden you feel lifted off of you. And you're able to sense the joy of God. And you're able to kind of metaphorically eat of the grain of the land because God's been so faithful to you. You can rejoice in God's faithfulness. Number one, reinforcing God's requirements. They don't go away just because you don't want to do it. Number two, rejoicing in God's faithfulness. God is totally faithful to you every day of your life. And lastly, respecting God's authority. Respecting God's authority. While the Israelite males were healing, possibly up to a month. So, listen, all the army guys, all the Marines, all the infantry, everybody that's going into Jericho or going in to take the land, they're healing. So imagine getting circumcised right before you go to war. It's going to take a minute or two or 20. So you know what's interesting here is there's only 2 people that made it into the promised land from the old generation. So if you get on Jeopardy and you're going to win some money, say who are the only 2 people that made it into Canaan from the old generation is Joshua and Caleb. And make sure you tithe on whatever money you win on Jeopardy, okay? Because your pastor gave you that answer. But here's the point. Joshua and Caleb have already been circumcised. So he's good. He did it like 40 years ago. He's gold. So imagine Joshua now is waiting for all the guys to heal. And he's like, oh, come on, you wimps. I did this like 40 years ago. So now watch. Joshua goes near Jericho. in the story. And it looks like as a general, he's looking at Jericho, how to take it, and he's like, because he doesn't know how he's going to do it. Next week, we will see one of the most famous stories in the Bible where the walls of Jericho fall down supernaturally. But at this point, he doesn't know how he's going to take it. They're a nomadic tribe. How are they going to take a walled city? You're not going to. Your only hope is to starve them out. And you might starve before they starve. So how's he going to take it? Joshua doesn't know. And you know what's awesome about this story is it looks like he's looking at the ground. He's probably thinking, we miraculously went across the Jordan. I don't know how we're going to take a walled city. And all of a sudden he looks up, and there, standing just a little ways away from him, is a guy with a sword. And Joshua must have been like, I can't believe I let a guy get this close to me. I didn't even notice him walking. Like, how could I be that lame that I'm looking at the ground, all of a sudden I raise my eyes up, and there's a guy with a sword. And you know what I love about this story? Joshua, he's the greatest general from 3,000 years ago. Joshua, in the first chapter, God says this to Joshua: no man will ever be able to stand before you. What that means is he's going to be unkillable his whole life. And so Joshua sees this guy with a sword in his hand, and Joshua stands up, pulls his sword out, and goes to confront this guy. And I love the question he asks him: are you for us? And probably pointing at Jericho, or for them. Are you for us or for our adversaries? And I love the answer of the guy. He goes, no. Doesn't really seem like an appropriate answer for my question. He goes, I'm the commander of the Lord's army, and I've come now. And you know what's amazing in this story is that Joshua, who God swore to him, no man will ever kill you. No one will ever stand before you the whole rest of your life. That means he's the most powerful general on earth in Joshua chapter 5. And what he should have done was he should have walked up to that guy and put this under his chin and gone, no, I asked you a question, son. And no's not the appropriate answer. But instead, you know what Joshua does? It says when the man says, I'm the commander of the Lord's army, I'm not for you or Jericho, I'm on my own team. He goes, I'm not on anybody's side, I'm on my own side, which only God can say. It says that Joshua gets down on the ground and he puts his face in the dirt. And you know, in Hebrew, the phrase there, it says, what does my master say to his servant? It means literally, what does my master say to his slave? Now for Joshua, who's the most powerful man, military man in the world at this point, for him to put his face in the dirt in total submission means one thing. It means that this is probably a theophany of Jesus. This is probably God showing up in the Old Testament for this reason, is that no time ever when an angel shows up does the angel tell a person, take your shoes off because where you're standing near me is holy. You know, the only other time that happened was at the burning bush, where Moses was told by God in the burning bush to take your sandals off because the place where you're standing is holy. That means that God's near. And so Joshua here probably runs into a pre-incarnate Jesus. That Jesus manifests himself as a man with a sword, being the commander of the Lord's army. And he goes, take your shoes off, because if you're near me, it's holy ground. And only God says that of himself. Never an angel says that of himself as an angel alone. With the miracle he had just experienced and God's promises to him, Joshua was the most powerful general on earth. Yet in the military, as in life, he gives way to his superior. As Joshua worshiped and removed his sandals in holiness, this was probably a theophany of Jesus. Against God, you're always overmatched. All authority is just borrowed authority from the ultimate authority. So gentlemen, as the leader of your home, you have authority in your home. God made you stronger than your wife, hopefully, unless she breaks your arm when she arm wrestles you. You might have a stud for a wife, I don't know. Masculinity and femininity is not conflict, should not be conflict-oriented. They should be complementary to one another. They should work with each other, not against each other. So God has made men very special in that respect. God has given you authority, but understand your authority is just borrowed from God. And how God views the authority he's given you, you'll be held accountable for someday. Our presidents will be held accountable for how they've shown authority. Our civic leaders will be held accountable for how they've had authority. You, as husbands, if you're a husband in here, will be held accountable for how you've been the authority in your home. And I love this about Joshua. He doesn't go, "What's up?" He gets on his face because he realizes that in front of God, he has no authority. Understand this, and I close. Submission in your life is the key to victory in your life. Let me help you. Ready, rebellious kids? Ready? Who you're submissive to dictates the direction of your life. Now, you might be thinking, "I'm not submissive to anybody." Yeah, you are. When the cherry beams go off in your rearview mirror, boo! You pull the heck over. If you decide to run, good luck, because a helicopter's coming for you. Understand, we are submissive in every area of our life. When you get on the road, think about this. When you get on the road, you're submissive to paint. There's paint that tells you what side of the road to drive on. And depending on what color it is, tells you if you're correct. You're submissive to a 16th-inch thick piece of paint. When you pull up to a stoplight, you're submissive to lights. And they're not even a thing. It's just red, yellow, or what's the other one? Green. Even light makes you submissive. If you decide to go, "I'm not going to be submissive, I'm going to drive on this side of the road because I'm from Europe." Then you get onto a head-on collision and you might die or kill someone else. In other words, submission is part of life. You're submissive every day of your life. It just depends on who or what you're going to be submissive to. If you decide not to be submissive to the color of light and you go right through an intersection and get T-boned and die, it's not somebody else's fault, it's your fault because you weren't submissive to light. Listen, the direction of your life will directly be dictated by who you're submissive to. God has put authority over your life that if you rebel against it, understand you just break yourself. You just get yourself T-boned. You're not going to be submissive to your parents if you're in their home? Okay. You're just going to train wreck your life. I'm going to tell you up front. You're not going to be submissive to pastors or leaders or whatever. Understand, if you fight against the authority God's given you, if it's godly, you just break yourself. And I love this about Joshua. He doesn't fight authority. He goes, "This is the ultimate authority. I'm the stud. I'm number one on the earth. But this guy's number one-er." Whatever pre-one is, that's what he is. The angel of the Lord is God. He is my ultimate authority. So let me encourage you with this as your pastor. Number one, today let this be your day. Go clean up past stuff. Make hard phone calls, make hard emails. Feel the weight lifted off you. Rejoice in God's faithfulness to you because he loves you every day of your life. And lastly, respect the authority God's put in your life. Doesn't mean you're going to be okay with everything they do, but at least respect the authority. Don't make chaos out of your life. God will bless you because he might rise you up to be an authority someday. But God will never raise somebody up to be authority when they're rebellious. God blesses those who will bless others in the way they live their lives.